Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm your host, Awawa Hamza. A little bit of good news first. 2 weeks ago, I shared data published by the Office of National Statistics about the birth rates of non-British born mothers. We had a look at how the Independent and the London Evening Standard misquoted the data. They quoted, the highest birth rate, 4.25, was amongst women from Afghanistan, closely followed by those from Somalia with 4.19 and Iraq with 391. Now, the data from the ONS clearly shows that Libya is the highest, Guinea is second, and Algeria is third. I made a complaint to the Independent and the London Evening Standard, and I have since received a response. An editor at the Independent apologized for the mistakes in the reporting, and as a result of this, the article has now been updated with the correct data. Here you see the first quote from the Independent. And this is the updated version. Now, this small victory didn't take much effort at all. But imagine if all of us ensured that we held editors and the wider media to account. We could really make a difference if we worked together. But moving on to our main story. In the previous episode, we discussed some of the war crimes that happened during the time that Ziad Barre was in charge of the nation. In that episode, we focused on the war crimes that occurred in the north and discussed one case in particular, the case against General Mohammed Ali Samatar, who served as Vice President and Minister of Defense of Somalia between 1980 and 1986, and Prime Minister of Somalia between 1987 and 1990, coincidentally being the first person to hold that post since Ziad Barre took control in 1969. Now, in June of 1988, and this was whilst Mohammed Ali Samatar was still the Prime Minister, the Somali government's war against the SNM resulted in an all-out aerial and ground assault on Hargeisa. The attack struck civilian neighborhoods the hardest and leveled most of the city. Over 5,000 residents were killed, but many reports say that number was at least quadruple that. Now, during that period, there's a large number of arbitrary arrests and detention. The episode sparked a lot of discussions on social media, where there were really three sides. Everybody agreed that those responsible should be held accountable. The first side wanted to focus on the crimes against the people of Somaliland. The second group wanted the first group to acknowledge the crimes that the SNM committed against the people of Somaliland themselves before they complained about the crimes committed by the government. And the third group just wanted to forget it all, forgive everyone and move on. Now, the third group's argument can only happen when the first two groups' propositions have been adequately dealt with. So, since we looked at a case from someone in Somaliland, accused of aiding and being a part of the SNM against the government, in this episode, we will look into a case from someone who lived in Mogadishu during the late 1980s and was also detained and tortured by the members of Ziad Barre's administration. It's important to understand that Somalis from across the nation were against the actions of the Ziad Barre administration, and those were crimes mostly committed by the NSS, the National Security Service. They are the intelligence agency of Somalia during the Ziad Barre administration, and if the NSS doesn't sound familiar to you, it should. There are really quite a lot of people allegedly connected to the NSS that have served in government since the Civil War. Now, these include Abdiqasim Salad Hassan, who was the head of the NSS. He was also the interior minister in Ziad Barre's administration, and later he became the president of the Transitional National Government between 2001 and 2004. Then we have Ali Mohammed Gedi, who was an alleged agent and or informer for the NSS, and he later became the TFG Prime Minister of Somalia. Also on that list is Hassan Abshir Farah, who was a regional governor during the Ziad Barre administration, and later also became the TFG Prime Minister of Somalia. But the two more well-known people with ties to the NSS are Tahir Yala Kahin, the previous president of Somaliland, who served as the NSS station chief in Berbera, and Ismail Umar Gele, the current president of Djibouti since 1999, who was reportedly trained by the NSS. Now, as you can see, a lot of people, including those I haven't mentioned, that were quite prominent during the time of the NSS, are still prominent figures in today's political arena. And some of them have even become heads of states during certain periods. Now, one of those people that was detained and tortured by the NSS in the 80s was Abu Bakr Hassan Ahmed. Professor Ahmed was a practicing barrister as well as a law professor at Somali National University in Mogadishu. He taught courses in constitutional law and international law, and his curriculum included the protection of human rights contained in the Somali constitution. Now, Professor Ahmed was very outspoken about the Siad Barre administration's attacks on freedom of expression and also their widespread abuse of human rights. He felt it was his responsibility as a teacher and as a lawyer to speak candidly to his students about these abuses. And it was this that got him noticed by the NSS, and especially noticed by Colonel Abdi Aden Magan. From approximately 1988 to 1990, Colonel Magan was chief of the NSS Department of Investigations, who was stationed in the headquarters in Mogadishu. Professor Ahmed was first detained by the National Security Service in 1981 and imprisoned without charge until 1986. After his release 5 years later, he returned to his law professor position at Somali National University, where he continued to teach his students about human rights protections. He also went back to his law practice and he began representing clients accused of political offences before the NSS court. Now, on November 20th, 1988, NSS officers under Colonel Magan's command arrested Professor Ahmed in Mogadishu. He was carrying a copy of the Amnesty International report titled Somalia, a long-term human rights crisis, which was published in September of 1988, which the NSS officers confiscated. Professor Ahmed was detained and held in solitary confinement and was interrogated day and night by the NSS officers who accused him of writing that report, and they threatened that if he did not confess, they would kill him. 2.5 months later, he was taken to Colonel Magan's office, where the same NSS officers who interrogated him were also present. Now, Colonel Magan accused Professor Ahmed of being a member of the United Somali Congress, the USC, which is a group established in January 1989, who were also fighting, just like the SNM was, against the Siad Barre government, but they were doing it from the south. And they were formed whilst Mr. Ahmed was still in detention. Now, the colonel told Professor Ahmed that if he did not confess to being a member of that group, they would torture him and get him to confess through that torture. Hours later, the officers brutally tortured him whilst interrogating him, and afterwards he was taken back to his cell. Now, 3 months after his initial detention, he was finally transferred from the NSS prison to the central prison in Mogadishu. And during the transfer, the duty officer read to him that he was charged with a violation of Article 19 of Law Number 54, which was established in 1970, authoring subversive material, which carried the death penalty. And this was the first time that he learned of any charge against him. And the day before his trial, he then received notice of the trial hearing and learned that the charge against him had been reduced to a violation of Article 18 of that same law, which is possession of subversive material. And that carried a 3 to 5 year prison sentence, or a fine of 15,000 Somali shillings. Now, on March 8, 1989, he was taken before the court. The trial lasted less than an hour. He wasn't provided an attorney to represent him. And during the trial, Professor Ahmed told the court that he had been tortured by the NSS officers and that it was Colonel Magan himself that had ordered his torture. But the court still convicted him and fined him 15,000 Somali shillings. His friend paid the fine on his behalf, and he was released. He returned to his home, and soon after he escaped the country. After having lived in the US for many years, he found out that Colonel Magan had also moved to the US. So he decided to pursue him through the US justice system instead. Have a look at this clip.
It's 1988 in Mogadishu, Somalia. The country is undergoing political unrest. There are claims of government torture of citizens. Abukar Ahmed remembers it like yesterday.
Mentally, I'm not so good because I have some nightmares in the night. So I'm suffering from that torture.
Torture outlined in this federal lawsuit. Ahmed claims his testicles were squeezed with iron instruments. Sand and small stones were forced into his mouth. He was beaten with sticks.
In front of me, he told his subordinates to do their job. That means that they have to torture me.
He says the order came from this man. Abdi Magan is a former colonel in the Somali military, now living in Columbus. Ahmed is suing him under the Torture Victim Protection Act.
He knows that he did all these things, not only to me, but to many Somalis. But he denied everything. This what I was expecting from him.
And that's exactly what Megan did. He denied the claims when we questioned him about the allegations.
I deny anything at all about this, allegation.
Ahmed says he spent 20 years trying to find Megan. He searched the internet for his name and was shocked to find where he was living. When I asked him what he would say to the man he believes ordered his torture, his answer was simple.
It's not exist nowhere that you can hide yourself until you confess and repent.
Now, with the help of the CGA, Ahmed V. McGann was brought before the U.S. District Court of the Southern District Court of Ohio on April 21, 2010. The complaint accuses McGann of command responsibility and personal responsibility for the torture, for the cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment, and the arbitrary detention. Now, the civil action was brought under the Alien Tort Statute and the Torture Victim Protection Act. And like any court case, this case had many twists and turns, but in terms of complexity, it was pretty straightforward. Colonel McGann was initially represented by counsel, who filed a motion to dismiss on June 11, 2010, which the prosecutors filed an opposition to. Now, the State Department got involved to advise whether the colonel was entitled to common law immunity, in the same way that they got involved for the case with General Samatar. And they decided that he wasn't entitled to that immunity on the 15th of March 2011. Now, 8 months later, the court granted Colonel McGann's lawyers' motion to withdraw from the case and granted the colonel a 28-day stay of the case, during which time he was required to let the court know and let the plaintiffs know whether he intended to seek new representation or whether he decided to proceed by himself. Now, the colonel did not renew his motion to stay the case with the requested information, and he had since not communicated with the court or the counsel of the plaintiffs. So on April 10, 2012, in defiance of a court order, he failed to appear for his deposition. And in all, he ignored at least 5 court orders before the close of discovery. So, a few months later, the court granted the plaintiff's motion for evidentiary sanctions, deeming that a number of the key facts have been established already and they didn't need to go over it again and again. So they also granted their motion for summary judgment because he didn't appear. And this leads us to May 30, 2013, Columbus, Ohio, where Professor Ahmed finally shared this story in federal court. And the court's summary judgment found Colonel McGann guilty and liable for damages. Now, he has since won an award in the fight for human rights. Professor Ahmed, have a look at this.
Now, please join me in congratulating Professor Ahmed, the winner of the 2013 IBA Human Rights Award. Engraved plaque.
Again, I am very happy to be with you and to share the ideals of human rights, which are principles that we can't allow to be cancelled, abolished by dictators or some other evil persons. Thank you very much.
See, these cases are 1 in a million, but they are the first few steps that we need to take. This is because we need to find out what the facts are, what really happened, get everyone's side to the story, and then deal with this together. And have you noticed how both defendants, Colonel McGann and General Samatar, did not really fight the charges? They only sought to get immunity for their actions during that period, and it's important that we hold those responsible accountable. so that we can move on as a nation and not hold whole groups of people accountable for the actions of a few. But we also need to ensure that those same groups do not hide those who have committed crimes. And we can only do that together. That was it for now. I'll catch you right after the break. Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm your host, Abu Hamza. There have been a lot of scary things happening at the same time. There were droughts in certain areas, flooding in other areas, and Johar was a good example of a place that was hard hit by the flooding and became almost impossible to reach by government troops, or by the humanitarian agencies, or by anyone else that was trying to help. I mean, have a look at the direct impact that this has had.
Most people were forced to come to our defensive position seeking for refuge. At the same time, there was lack of food, lack of water, lack of medication. Now, when we communicated to humanitarian agencies through our high authorities, they were able to respond. But now the challenge was they could not move by road. The trucks could not cross the water. What happens is that most of them could find alternative routes, but they could always be delayed. So the civilians were mostly affected because food could not reach them in time.
See, the climate change that impacts the Somali Peninsula has really harsh effects. It's been nearly 3 years since the famine of 2011. But there are warnings by the UN right now that another one might be coming if more aid and financial assistance is not provided to their programs.
The UN's Food Security and Nutrition Analysis Unit in its latest assessment says below average harvest is expected in most parts of Somalia. It has highlighted poor rainfall, flooding and a devastating storm in the northeastern Puntland region as key reasons for the poor harvest in early 2014.
The flooding in South Somalia and other natural calamities has adversely affected food production. Most of the displaced are the farmers and pastoralists, and these are the same people who feed the nation through livestock and food production.
The UN agency pointed out that the number of Somalis in crisis has reduced to 870,000, but there are 2.3 million people in stress who mainly rely on livelihood support. In its detailed report, the United Nations research body FSNAU says that over 200,000 children under 5 suffer from acute malnutrition. It further adds that this ratio of 1 in 7 children malnourished is among the highest in the world.
You would really think from this warning that everybody should donate, especially the governments of the international community. But there's always another side to the story, an alternative solution. Because there are a lot of good stories out there about positive things that are being done by Somalis. And some do it as individuals. Others do it as part of a wider organization. But more recently, there's been a real change in the dynamic landscape of Somali agriculture. I mean, things are really on the up and up. For the first time in recent history, instead of receiving food from donors, Somali farmers are now able to supply high-quality food to the UN's World Food Programme, which can then be redistributed to areas of Somalia where food is more scarce. And this is a major breakthrough for the farmers, I mean, especially coming from an area that had the famine less than 3 years ago. And this was made possible through the support of the EU and Austria and other partners. And under the program, the farmers were trained by experts on different aspects, including grading their grain, post-harvest handling, as well as storage and warehouse management. See, these skills have been essential. They've been crucial in ensuring good quality for the grain that meets the international standards required for purchase. Now, the farmers' aspirations are not only that they want to feed their fellow countrymen and women, but also to be a major grain supplier for the region.
Despite the 20 years of conflict in Somalia, the bread or the anjera on the plates of the Somalis were produced mainly from the Somalis. So farmers have been always engaged, they have always been engaged in the production. Our plan now is to revive the agricultural sector. Its recovery is not only a matter of producing agricultural products. It's about recovering the whole economy and contributing to the stabilization of the country and the peace.
They told us, we are very glad, most of the maize that we was bringing to Somalia from abroad, we will stop. And then we will take your maize for the people of Somalia, and even if the East African people, if possible. We can produce so many maize and many other grains we can produce if we get help. The help which we need is only to get market for our maize. We can produce the maize any quantity they need.
But it's not just agriculture. Other areas of Somalia are also improving, including the rebuilding of the fishing industry. Now have a look at this.
We are opening the renovation of the fish market of Mogadishu. This is the biggest fish market in Mogadishu. Many people depend on the operation of this market. It touched the livelihood of so many Somali people. We are very grateful to Great Britain, its government and its people, the contribution that they have paid to this market. Without their support, it was impossible to renovate this market, and we are very grateful. We advise that the fishermen should take care of this market.
The UK government financed this project in partnership with the Benadir Regional Administration, the District Commissioner for Hamerwain, and the Fishermen's Association. We're extremely proud of the work that's been done here, particularly the support that we've received from the local authorities. It's an exceptional job, and we hope that it will have significant improvements on the livelihoods of the fishermen and even of the consumers who come here. They're going to be able to sell more fish, to store more fish. There's a cold storage facility for the fish.
See, these are the kind of initiatives that I love hearing about. Aid makes you dependent on your donors, yes, but development assistance, when done properly, can have a huge impact on the people. It can make them self-sufficient, and if developed further, they can become a pillar for the rest of the nation and the wider East Africa region to lean on during times of difficulty and drought. So remember, there are two sides to every story, and we have to support the positive ones to help reduce the negative stories. We need change, and that's what this next story is about. See, during International Women's Day, everybody reflected about the rights that women had in Somalia and how often those have been violated. During a Women's Open Day last year, these concerns were expressed quite clearly, as you can see.
The main obstacle for women, it's not religion. People, they may say it is religion, Islamic religion. It's not that, it's the culture. The culture, because our system still is based, the selection of and members of parliament or government, it depends on it's based on a clan base. And the clan, they prefer, the leaders of the clan are the male. We are in the male society system. So who will be first will be a male. I will not have chance because they will give a male in my position. So the main obstacle is peace and security, and then the culture.
The women are done with lip services. We want real, tangible actions, and we don't just want, whenever we talk about women representations, they throw one or two women in somewhere and all of a sudden that solves our problems. Our problems are institutional. Women early on are discriminated against in education, in job opportunity, and then later on in decision-making bodies. So we want to assure the president and the rest of the government that we are committed and we want to be his partner. We want to be the government's partner in this role. But we are done with lip service and we want real, tangible solutions.
I was the only girl that was raised with 11 boys. So I was, in a way, the princess and grew up to be the queen by my family.
gabadha markay yareed guriga joogtay hooyada iyo aabaha wiilka iyo gabadha isku si uma maamuleen.
Always had unconditional admiration, respect and love. People listened, they paid attention.
Guriga joogto gabadha waxaa la barayay inay wiilka dharkiisa dhaqda, gabadha waxaa la barayay wiilka sariirtiisa inay gogasho, gabadha waxaa la barayay inay qadada u kariso wiilka. While wiilka uu banaanka aadayo uu dadkiisa la soo ficiltamayo uu wax soo qaadanayo.
My opinions were respected. However, that's not for every family. Finding out when I came back to work in Somalia that not every Somali woman had the same privileges that I had. So I have to then try to find a way to make sure that all those women have the same rights, have the same privileges, where they're listened to, that they're respected, that they're appreciated and they're valued as human beings.
So during this year's International Women's Day celebrations, the government and AMISOM really got involved to ensure that they celebrate the female peacekeepers in the AMISOM forces. I mean, they had celebrations with other Somali women and they were congratulating the Somali women for all that they have achieved. And on behalf of the Somali government, the new Minister for Women and Human Rights Development, Khadija Mohammed, said, quote, "This is one of the most important days in our year, and today we mark it by pledging the government's complete support to women in the country," unquote. The minister also thanked AMISOM for supporting the Somali government, and then she reaffirmed the full support of the government to protect women, saying that the ministry will do everything to empower women. And this is the crucial part for me. This is a new minister on an international celebratory day where she can really make an impact. And I felt that she just spoke favourably of everyone instead of tackling the real problems that are present. See, I appreciate the need for diplomacy, but there's diplomacy and then there's just talk and no action. And as you can see, it's not just the issues on women's rights, but human rights as a whole that needs addressing, that needs improving. I mean, we need a real commission that looks into previously committed war crimes as well as civil, human rights violations, as well as looking into the disputes that still exist today. This can be part of a larger reconciliation process where this anger is not passed down to the next generation, and we can have some real progress and development, and hopefully then have some real forgiveness, where we can come together to help the farmers and fisheries, as well as the builders and doctors, and have real representatives in the political spectrum. This is what we need, and many more things. And inshallah, when we come together, we can achieve anything. But for now, I'd like to thank you for watching The Briefing Room. I have been your host, Abu Hamza. Have a good evening. Assalamu alaikum.